third speaker this morning is James Schmidt, and again, a man from my hometown, Fort Collins, and he's been working 30 years as an aerospace engineer, mostly in the project management area. Very, very bright person all around. He's also been following alternative energy devices all that time. And he started to look into John Bedini's work. Bedini is kind of a legend in our field. If you don't know about him, definitely you want to find out. And he is now far enough along to show us some pretty neat hardware. So let's welcome James Schmidt.
Thank you, Michael. In the back row, can you hear me back there fine? Great. The first thing I'd like to do is just say this is a great conference. I used to go to the conferences in the city, had great conferences, but this is really great. And I want to thank the people who put on this conference, Steve Ellswick, Terry Brady, and especially John Fiala. They do a great job. I'm going to give them a hand. I'm going to talk about the Bedini motor, and my title is Mysteries of the Bedini Motor, and it's appropriately titled, or a subtitle is How to Access Negative Energy in a Kit Form. I represent Renaissance Charge, and they have a number of kits that actually represent the technology John Bedini developed, and I'm going to talk about the experiments that I did in conjunction with this kit. I have two objectives today. One is I just got into experimentation more recently. I've had an interest but not really experimented. So you're going to see my evolution as an experiment. I have a physics degree, but I'm not a physicist. I'm a scientist, and I know something about electronics, but I'm not an electronics engineer. So you're going to see the evolution of a scientist trying to figure this stuff out as he goes, and try to understand if the radiant energy and the vacuum energy process that's going on in this motor. And I hope to demonstrate that to you as I go through here. I guess I point in this direction. Quick overview. John Bedini, who is he? What is a Bedini motor? We'll talk about how that works, the basis of it. We'll talk about a little about the theory of vacuum energy extraction relevant to this motor. And then we're going to get into the experiments. This really became an experiment in how do batteries function. And you start to realize that if you extract energy from anywhere, you either got to use it or store it. And in this case, we have to use the batteries. And so I had to learn how the batteries work. And you have to understand, understanding energy balance, energy flow, you had to understand the batteries. So that's why this became a battery experiment. And then we'll talk about other Bedini kits and the Renaissance battery rejuvenator, which has been a great adjunct to my experiments. And then one of the things I'm excited about, I've been associated with this community a long time, and I'm sort of a coordinator, manager, and I'm going to talk about a process I think we need to go forward to gather all of the experimenters and funders together and take the next step to get this into our homes and to the businesses and to our communities. So that'll be the last part of my talk. I did. So real quick, what is my background? I'm an aerospace engineer, got a bachelor's degree in physics, and know a lot about chemistry, but my background has been in strategic missile systems, those missiles that are buried up there in North Dakota and Wyoming. Help maintain those missiles. My expertise is in nuclear weapons effects. Whoopee. Not too many people hire those kind of people. But in getting into that area, I became knowledgeable in so many different areas because nuclear weapons effects. By the way, nuclear weapons are over unity, if you didn't know that. So I have experience in radiation effects in electronics, shockwave physics. Shockwave physics and structural dynamics is what helped me realize when the 9/11 events occurred that those buildings did not come down naturally. There was an implosion. That's the only way they could have come down as fast as they did. And most of the engineers, scientists will tell you that. And then electromagnetic pulse. Vacuum energy, I've had an interest in over the last 30 years and tried to build a homopolar generator in the 80s. I attended all the extraordinary energy conferences in Salt Lake, and just recently become a serious investigator in the lab. And the things that I'm more interested in, more practical things, what can we bring on board quickly and put into society? So some of the things I'm interested in are the Tesla pump and rotor, a cavitation heater. Cavitation heater is basically taking the phenomena of cavitating water, and it puts out a lot of heat, and they become a very efficient heat generator. Compressed air water pump, there's a patent from a guy in Arizona where he uses geothermal energy in conjunction with a Joule-Thomson device to expand air into water and pump it, and he got over unity, but he is using a lot of the geothermal in the ground to help him do that. I experimented with my wife's garden, electrified the plants and kept the bugs off, and it grew twice as fast as the rest of the plants using kind of a Tesla approach, antenna in the ground, and then electrified the plants. And then my most recent project has been the Bedini Monopole motor kit. And this started in January, and I wanted to come to the conference, but I didn't really have the funds, and so I just called up and said, you know, can I speak at the conference? And what are you going to speak on? Well, I think I'll speak on the Bedini motor. So I got the kit, put it together, and did some experiments, and here I am. Who is Bedini? John has been around like 30 years. He's famous for the bass audio amplifiers. And back then, if you had an audio amplifier, you wanted a bass audio amplifier. He had great interest in electricity and crystal radios. He went out and found his own crystals, made his own diodes, made his own transistors, and he started working with motor generators. He says, well, you know, he just innocently said, well, why can't I use a battery to run a motor to charge a battery, which would run the motor? So he got into that and started experimenting with it, and he came up with a chrome ray device, which actually did that. Little report, Tesla books, you can get it, and very interesting. He's done a lot of research in other areas in alternative energies, including the Rife pulsing technology for healing, earth batteries. He's developed a process for rejuvenating batteries using the Bedini technology from the motor I'll talk about today. And he's also got some technology that makes working with solar cells much more easily. It's a controller and a device that makes it more efficient to use the solar cells. He has produced a series of DVDs. You can go online and find Energy from the Vacuum, and you can get that through Renaissance Charge Out. I think there's 19 DVDs, great teaching in there. And Tom Bearden is also in that series. And Tom Bearden, a PhD in physics, was very instrumental in developing the theories with John and how his device worked. Measuring over unity, just real quick. We need to understand what over unity means. We're going to talk about it and measure it. The first place you go is, you know, the cowboys. They know everything, they understand everything, so you ask them what over unity is. Says, well, I understand that. You just put 2 bales of hay in, and 1 bale of hay in, and you get 2 out the other end. That's over unity. So how does the monopole motor kit and how does a monopole motor work? Basically, it's got three magnets on a rotor that pass three coils. And when you pass a magnet past a coil, it generates electricity in it. In this case, you've got one coil that's bifilar wound, so that you provide a trigger, then provides energy into the coils, and then you set up an electrical motor. But when you get the back EMF out, it creates a radiant pulse. It's 150 volts in strength and brings in the radiant energy. And this is all about pulse shaping. And John and Tom Bearden discovered that when you take a north magnet and another north magnet in a coil form, when you create a gradient, a very high gradient voltage there in the rise time and the fall time, you create these very high pulses of 150 volts, and that's where you extract your radiant energy. So that's the key to this motor, is that high gradient. And you look at any of the major energy, alternative energy devices, and they're about a high gradient pulsing, and that's how you get the energy out. One of the basic principles. Here's the monopole I'm showing here, and let me just real quick. You can see the motor running up here. How do we get? Can we get that motor online over here? The picture. Get the picture of the motor. Looking for the picture of the motor, John. John promised me he'd had a picture over here. There we go. Okay, so we have a charging battery and a primary battery. And the primary battery, which is in this case on this side over here, the primary battery is used to run the motor. And you run the motor with that. There's a trigger which triggers a transistor, which then provides a pulse to the coils. And then the back EMF comes out in the 150 volt spikes, and then charges your charging battery. So that's basically how it runs. And then I've got three other coils on here, two of which I'm not using. A top coil here that is just an energizer coil, and I'm running the LEDs, which you see out front here with that. Okay, John. Next. Okay. Here's a basic schematic of the motor. Very simple. Push the wrong button. Right there is the coil we're talking. There's the bifilar coil, and in this case, on this motor, we have three coils that are in parallel, so they get the pulse at the same time in parallel. And there's the transistor, and that trigger pulse just comes out and gets the base of the transistor, pulses it, and then brings the energy out of the battery to pulse it and release it through the main coil, and that drives the motor. And then the back EMF is taken out through this diode and charges the other battery. So that's very simple. It's called a simple schoolgirl circuit, and he just sells those by themselves. So you can apply it to whatever design that you want to. This is a schematic that comes with the kit, and in my case. And it's just kind of laid out the way you put it together. I'm only using one transistor on here because it was designed for going up to like 40 volts, but I'm afraid I'd throw off the magnets in that case. So I've stuck with one transistor. Works just fine. This is the schematic that would come with the kit if you bought one now. A little more explanation to it. One of the keys to this motor, other key, is the synchronization of the pulses. So you need a pulse to go in, still pushing the wrong buttons, from the battery to power the motor, but you want to keep those separate from the back EMF pulse to keep it from loading down the motor and get out those high voltage spikes. So that's one of the keys that John figured out. And he had a hot rod, so he understood engines and motor timing, and this is, it clicked with him. That's how you keep the motor from loading down. And if nothing else, this motor runs very efficiently just because of that. I got hold of an oscilloscope just briefly and took some pictures of what is happening in the motor. This is taken at the emitter right out of the transistor, and hope you can see that pulse shape that's coming out. It's very, very symmetrical and regular. So that pulse is initial pulse is that goes in there is 15.4 volts, and the output the initial back EMF is 19.4 volts, and it has there's 3 magnets on there, 3 coils, and the pulse width difference between the pulses is 2.2 milliseconds on that. What you don't see, and that I could see when I did this, is that right here you see these flashes of light, and that was the radiant energy come off, but I didn't get time to zero down in on it and see what that exactly looked like. But John Bedini has done that, and with his bicycle motor that he drives with this circuit, he was able to get pictures of it, and it was indeed 150 volts at the peak, and there's just a few microseconds pulse width on these pulses. And then down here you can just see the basic 12 volt wave, and it calls this an H wave. Another concept that John Bedini and Tom Bearden come up with is the idea of negative resistance or negative energy. And as you experiment with it, you start to realize that there is something going on, that energy is from the vacuum is being cohered into your batteries, into the coils. And so the idea behind this is you have these energy spikes when going through a resistor, turns it into like a negative resistor, and supposedly it will turn it a little cooler than ambient as the energy is drawn in and drawing the radiant energy. And in my case, I just worked with the batteries. I didn't get to do the experiments with the resistance. Rick Friedrich, who has a lot of YouTubes on this, has done that, but I didn't get to reproduce that myself. So the energy out theoretically is a combination of your input energy and the radiant energy that you're taking in. That would theoretically make it over unity if you get to that situation. So the experiments I did was all about charging batteries. We did single to multiple batteries. We reconditioned dead batteries. We did cold charging with the vacuum spikes, and I can did the temperature measurements. The batteries were actually a degree less than ambient, so the batteries were working cold. I experienced large jumps in battery voltage at turning it on. I demonstrated increased capacity in the batteries over time with this pulsing, and that happens and that also occurs with the battery charger. I did not get to the cold energy demonstration with the resistor shunt, but then demonstrated energy conversion to use with LEDs, and also I worked with some capacitors, which was also interesting, because you learn that there's a conditioning that goes on with the batteries, with what you're working with, the capacitors, and I could take the capacitor off after experimenting with it and charging it for a while, and you take the capacitor off and you thought you'd discharge it, and you find it's charging back up again without it being connected. So some interesting properties to capacitors that I think needs to be pursued. Batteries are the key, and because you have to understand input and output, and so that's where my experiments took me was with the batteries. Here's an example of a battery rejuvenation. I go down to Interstate Batteries and said, I need a couple of dead batteries, and they would give me the dead batteries. I put them on my pulse battery charger and charge up the dead batteries, and I got a good battery, and they get better with time. This particular battery, the D battery, is my Methuselah, one of the first batteries I got, and it's just working great in the circuits. So getting into the batteries, you need to understand your batteries and to prove to yourself that you're getting more energy in or out than you are in. So you need to understand your batteries. You got to characterize the batteries. How do they charge? How do they discharge with time? And so here's a characterization of my B battery. And so this line represents the charging, and the downslope is the discharging of it. And I charge it, in this case, I charge it with a regular battery charger, but the voltage versus time is still linear. And my measurements were taken with resting voltages. That is, rather than active in the circuit, I would turn the circuit off and then give it a couple of minutes resting. And those are the base, so that's the baseline of the batteries, is the resting voltage. And that, I did that in all my measurements. And so that's the difference between the actual voltage and then the resting voltages. I discharge it through an inverter 30-watt bulb. That's how I did my discharging and made my measurements. And I don't have a recorder that recorded it, every 5 minutes or anything like that. That was me. I had to break off from my television show or whatever I was doing and go out and check the voltage and the time. Next thing I wanted to know is, does it charge and discharge the same way? And that kind of proves that here, where we have a charge and then a discharge, and the two blue lines are in parallel, so it appears to me that they're pretty much in sync in terms of putting capacity into the battery and taking it out. It does it the same way with voltage. This is versus voltage. So, and that's energy in joules versus voltage. And then here's just a comparison of two different batteries. They look pretty much the same. And then I derived an equation whereby I determined that the change in energy with the change in voltage. The reason for this is where you want to get to. If the input battery is dropped a volt, and the output battery has come up a volt, are those both the same amount of capacity in both batteries? So you can compare energy in one and energy out in the other. And so when I go through that, I find out that this is dependent on current. So the equation here is current over the slope of the voltage time curve from a characterization, and then just at two different voltages. So what you find is that rate of energy drop or increase versus voltage is pretty constant over your output voltage. And the top one was done with the inverter, 2.4 amps. The bottom curve is for the actual motor, where you only have 100 milliamps coming out of the battery. So, and those are pretty parallel and they're pretty constant. The bottom one, just for number's sake, about 9.5 times 10 to the fourth joules per volt is what that constant comes out to be. So now you got something to work with that you can measure input and output. First battery. So I'm going to go through a series of batteries, keep on adding on a batteries. This is my first experiment, so I didn't know what to expect, what is going on here. So first thing that happens is that your charging battery just takes off wild. It goes from 13 clear up to 15 volts. I don't know what's going on. So, boy, wow, this really works. What I found out later in an experiment, and this would happen to me every once in a while, not all the time, but what I figured out was it's the meters. I just had some Harbor Freight, get my meters for almost free at Harbor Freight. They're digital meters. I think what's going on is there's a capacitor in that circuit in the meter, and for some reason it will just take off and charge up. It doesn't happen all the time. That's my theory at this point in time. But basically with a single battery, this is another experiment, and you can see the output battery charging up and the input battery going down. So that's just a one-on-one, just like I have up here. Another one battery test, and this is another weird one. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that the difference between you have your initial pre-start voltage, and then you start charging up your output voltage, and it's pretty linear along here, and then you let it rest at the end, and so it gives you confidence you can take your end voltage and your starting voltage and make your comparisons there. And this is the discharge, and again I get this anomalous pulse in there. I get those every once in a while, so every once in a while I get those. So I've got two batteries, and again I've got this anomalous pulse there. In fact, I did something and it just crashed on me, so that made me believe it was probably in the meter or something else. And this is overnight. This one ran overnight. You can see it's pretty linear in its discharge, and this is the output battery charging up. So you're not getting a whole lot in the output versus the discharge on the input at this point in time. Now we're into the three batteries, and you can see that. And I started with a low voltage battery versus a high voltage battery, and of course it's much easier to charge it up, but it's still not charging up too much. But they start to asymptote as you get out here in the second day, as they get closer in voltage. And this is again charging three batteries, but better indication. And what I found out was that during the daytime they were asymptoting, and I thought, well, I didn't really know what was going on there. But as we go on, here's four batteries, and so again we've got this plateau on the second day, and then it drops off, and then it starts to plateau again. And I should have ran this out a little bit longer. But you're also getting in an area where the input and output voltages are starting to equalize. And then I got into the 5 batteries and run this over, 4 days, and you start getting some interesting results. And what I found was, and I understand that this has been reported elsewhere, but I thought I was the first one to find it. You always hope. Is that as you get into the second day, they plateau out. Overnight, they drop down. And then the second day, the third day, it plateaus out again. So it acts like the radiant energy is really just working during the daytime, and that's what I'm hearing other people are telling me also. So an interesting sidelight of this experiment. And now I decided, well, I'm up to a point where maybe it looks like the radiant energy is working. I'm getting some balance in the energy here, maybe not over here, but let's try swapping the batteries. So I'm swapping the battery in these 5 battery experiments, and I don't know where to start. I'm just experimenting. So I let the batteries run for a couple of days and really run it down, maybe where I shouldn't have. But I was experimenting, and so this is the first couple of days, and then this is the second. I get into day 4, 5, and 6, and I'm still And one of the things I found out in this experiment was, and I found a way of culling out my batteries. Some of the batteries had a high internal resistance, and they didn't seem to work as well in this particular experiments at least. And so I was able to pull that battery out because it discharged just too quickly, whereas the other one stayed in a normal range. This is a 6 battery experiment, so I went to swapping 6 batteries. And so first battery here, the A battery, I just run it 2 hours. I'm still experimenting with the timing on it. I get into, so I decided to drop down to 1 hour swapping. So every hour I'd swap it out. And so this is the, it starts to look like you can keep the voltages within a range here and just swapping the batteries. So you're taking, in the 6 batteries over here in the charging size, you're just swapping all the batteries one at a time, just every hour. You swap the battery, just rotate them through. And the voltages seem to stay in a certain range. So I'm claiming that I've got a self-running system here. Oh, I forgot. I also am running a motor here over here at the same time while all the battery voltages are staying the same. So that's the general idea. And if you were to add additional coils, I'm only running off 3 coils here, not the Energizer circuits, which you could fix. You could prepare build a circuit, a capacitor dumping circuit that also could charge those batteries with the proper timing on it. You can add additional rotors, put more coils on there running off the same battery, so you can increase the leverage here, if you will. So a lot going on here. This is just using the B battery as a primary, just showing different discharge versus charging. That was one of the experiments I did. And this was a discharge of multiple batteries, and I'm not sure what was going on with this particular battery here, but the rest of them seemed to, no matter how many batteries, they all discharged the same. So that was the idea there. Some simple observations and recommendations on these motors. The motors generally require some conditioning. They need to understand that they're being pulsed by radiant energy, and if you work with them for a day, it's often good to just let them sit for overnight, and then the next morning they really take off. They act, they show the effects of being conditioned. So conditioning is part of it. It's just like us. I mean, it takes a while to program us to do something, and you got to get the energy flowing, the mind conditioned so that you're, you can get going. Work within a linear range. My experimentation, if you stay in a linear range like 12.2 to 12.6 volts, you'll better understand what's going on, and you're working with a linear range of the battery. Use new or well-conditioned batteries, so you don't get some of the anomalies that I was experiencing, and generally work toward the higher end of the battery. And again, it appears that I'm demonstrating that radiant energy works better or more in the daytime. And what I'm seeing is that you need at least 4, with this simple setup with only 3 coils, you need at least 4 batteries to start observing the batteries starting to become negative resistors and cohere the radiant energy. Fewer batteries, if you get and I didn't get this far, I didn't get into a capacitor dumping circuit, which there are designs for, but you may need fewer batteries to get the condition that you want by using the capacitor dumping circuit, and may not require your swapping. And if you're going to be swapping, recommend swapping them frequently, in short time periods with less than an hour, and then swapping them with only 1 or 2/10 of a volt in drop in the primary voltage. I've had questions about, well, can't you just use a simple swapping circuit? Yeah, I think you could design one. Rick has come up with one, but it's expensive, but you could take that approach also. Other experiments, I just had to try this out. My wife and I are into alternative health, and so I charged up some water with it, and she has a biofeedback device, Quantum FX, that she uses on the family, and so I built a scalar wand for her. It uses the scalar energy off of that, and I hooked that up to it also. An idea that I had with enhancing this was to use a Tesla approach to have an antenna tied into the coil, then grounded. Can you pump more energy into it that way? I haven't done that experiment, but that's a thought. There's the healing wand, just a wire around a rose quartz crystal. And interestingly enough, this is a bright pink rose quartz, and when she used it, she sucked all the color out of it. If anybody knows how that occurs, or I'd like to know, but that's what happened. And there's my experiment with charging the water. And when you charge it this way, there are no bubbles, so there's no electrolysis going on here. I just used my trusty pendulum to determine it was really charged. And then when I drank the water, I had a high for the rest of the afternoon. There was a lot of energy in that water. But those are just anecdotal. I haven't done any other experiments beyond that. So what are the basic aspects of this motor that make it an alternative energy, a vacuum energy device? The large voltage spikes that you get out of it, 150 volt spikes using the north on north pulsing of the magnets and coil. According to John Bedini and Tom Bearden, it does produce scalar waves. I haven't measured that, don't know how to measure that at this point in time. It does appear to extract energy from circuit elements, resistors, the bulbs, LEDs, and particularly the batteries. The circuit elements seem to operate in cold. I get the batteries a degree less than ambient when I measure the temperature of those. And you can use a low battery voltage to charge a higher battery voltage, which is what I'm doing right here, right now. You can use a single battery to charge multiple batteries, and a recommendation there is when you do that, use bus bars. I was using the alligator clips with wires to hook them all together, and I was getting a big gradient across the 6 batteries. But I took you just take a quarter-inch copper tube, pound it out, and lay it across the batteries. There's absolutely no voltage. You get instantaneous 150 volts going on all those batteries at the same time. It can be made self-running with the proper tuning, sufficient negative elements, sufficient batteries, and keeping your timing short, and the voltages in swapping the voltage differences short also. There are other monopole kits available, 4-pole monopole kits, 10-pole monopole kits. The 10 poles stand up about this high, about 18, 20 inches. And then you can add rotors. So he has a 12-pole monopole kit built out to the floor. You just add rotors on. You can take the 10-pole monopole kit and add on rotors and get up to 30, perhaps even more, actual coils on that motor and put out a significant amount of energy on the backside. I haven't heard any numbers or seen any demonstrations myself, but he's selling these kits. I've heard a guy in Miami who says he's getting 1 kilowatt out of a single 10-pole monopole kit. So there is opportunity and the possibilities here for powering your home with it. He's also developing currently what he calls window motors. Now, window motor is simply gives you more torque, as opposed to these others are more for energizing. The window motor is just basically taking your coil and stretching it out, making it into a regular electric motor or generator, and then you just have long magnets. So it's the same principle electrically, the way he runs it. It just provides you with a lot more torque. Rick Friedrich is doing a conference of his own. John Bedini prefers to stay close to home these days, so they're putting on the conference up there. So they didn't check to see if we had a conference going on down here, and they just picked a date, and it just happened to be this weekend. Rick is using these window motors. He's powering a lawnmower. I understand he did a wheelie in November with it in demonstrating that motor. I understand he has one that runs at 100 horsepower. He's using it to run an RC airplane, and he's also put one into his, and I think that's the 100 horsepower, running a motorboat. So these window motors are the power ones. The round coiled ones are simply the Energizer kits. And there's a picture of the different kits. So there's the 4-pole monopole motor. There's the single 10-pole monopole. And then here's one where you took the 4-pole monopole and added other rotors on here, and it extended it out. And you can get these kits through Renaissance Charge. I just ask if you go through my website, batteriesmadenew.com, I get credit for the sale on that, and that would be appreciated. And then there's the battery chargers. So the battery chargers have the same technology that are in these motors. That is, they're pulsing. They put in a high spike pulse and pulse the batteries, and in the process, they demonstrated the reconditioning of the batteries. I've taken a battery set in Wyoming for 5 years. When I first got it, it measured 3 volts, and then I used the battery charger over a couple of days, charging it, discharging it, got it up to 12.5 volts. It thinks it's a new battery now. And as I explained, I go to Interstate Batteries, pick up dead batteries, and just charge them up, and gotten to be good friends with the owner down, and we just have fun. I bring in a battery that doesn't work for me. He says, "You gave me this crappy dead battery." So we have fun with that. There's several chargers that are available. I don't have it out here, but out the table I've got a universal charger, goes from AA batteries up to 12 volt batteries, and even charges the tool batteries. And instantly you have a battery for life, because you can just continue to recharge it. It gets better, and I've had no problems with the batteries that I've charged up with mine. They're great. Car batteries, same thing. He has a special battery charger for golf carts, and he actually has a Mustang, a 1960, 58 Mustang, and he's converted that to an electrical vehicle, and has batteries in that, and got some old batteries, and he just charges those up. So he's a special charger for electric vehicles also. So if you're talking about a $5,000 replacement for batteries, and you only have to spend $1,400 for a charger, I think the price will come down. We're going to have, and besides that, the way the motor runs, the way the battery charger works, and the way the technology works, you're going to need fewer batteries. So there's a big advancement in the electric vehicles just by themselves. There's a picture of a couple of the one on the left over here is just designed for automobile batteries, just a small one designed for automobiles. So in summary on the motor part of this talk, this is just a great kit for experimenting with. And for kids and trying to learn science, there's so much science in this little motor, from the magnetism, electromagnetism, electric fields, and understanding the basics of electricity. It's just a great little kit, and then they'll start learning about etheric energy, vacuum energy possibilities. So that's one of the things that I've gone to charter schools and they let me in and demonstrate it, and the kids love it, and the teachers have got this question mark, what's going on here? It's fun. So now I'd like to talk about etheric energy and how do we get this into the homes, business, and communities and practical devices we can use every day. What do we need to take that next step? And so I have a kind of a vision for the future with etheric energy. And that starts out with, we spread out across this country in little communities like in, over in Europe, just small villages, communities, all across this land. So we fill in all the space across the land, and then you have the metropolitan areas are not for living, but they're for commerce, and maybe where you work and maybe not, and you travel with anti-gravity cars. Communication also would be through the earth, through the vacuum. Tesla, Stubblefield demonstrated those technologies. There's people working with it now. And all of this technology, no meters. Nowhere are there meters. That's the key. Have free access to replicable databases for education and research. And then maybe in the communities you have a central energy creation device which just powers the little community without the big power lines. And then, of course, energy devices in the home. Here's a kind of my vision of a future Atlantis with an anti-gravity car here floating by. And so in the area of transportation, you'd have anti-gravity cars, ships, buses, all driven anti-gravity barges, fuelless trains, airships. And then water could be created from the air. Or use vacuum energy devices to pump it from the ground. Heating and cooling, you would drive your air conditioner with vacuum energy devices and your heater. Stubblefield had devices where he used orgone energy and would tap into tree roots, and he had a couple of polished plates, and heat waves would come off those plates, and heated his home that way. That was back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we need to take a look at that too. Another area would be construction materials. Be nice to have materials that we can recycle our homes occasionally. My wife likes to change the furniture if she could. She'd change the house around too. Lighting, self-controlled, self-illumination. These LEDs that I'm driving here are driven by spikes. Very efficient. We're starting now to get LED lights. They're touted to be high efficiency and low wattage, but this even does it much better than that, and you still get the same amount of illumination. So how do we get there from where we are now? We're in the mode of experimenting, a lot of ahas, and we're trying to understand it, understand what the principles are, and people are actually building devices, powering their homes, and here and there. So we need a process where we can more efficiently and maybe quicker develop these devices and put them in the home, our businesses, and community. And to do that, I think we need continuing funding and support of vacuum energy basic research and technology development. We need to beef that up a little bit, and especially the coordination of it, and education through this great extraordinary technology technology conference. And then we need to figure out a way to integrate it into academia and get those scientists to change their minds a little bit and be a little more productive in what they're doing. So how do we get there? Well, one way would be to set up some nonprofit organizations that could be used for research and development, and coordination of funding, technology screening, and some of the education. And we also need to provide maybe more venues, maybe individual venues. So we got health, we have energy devices, maybe we need to spread out and have individual venues. And then set up vacuum energy product incubators. This is occurring in many cities across the country. We have one in Fort Collins, Colorado, right here in Albuquerque. They started one of the first ones where they did technology transfer from the major laboratories to businesses outside. And so if we apply this to the vacuum energy research and development arena, that would be another idea. So here's how it would work. This would be a process. You'd have an incubator that is coordinating the funding and the technology screening. For instance, the incubator that we have there in Fort Collins, they have meetings once a month. They bring in promising new technology, people who are trying to sell their technology and get a business started, and they'll give their talks. The funders are there, and the guy with the best briefing goes away with the money. And then this happens once a month, and of course the funders can go talk to the other people also. So that would be, a way of screening out the best possibilities and getting some funding going. And then one of my dreams was to develop a co-op research laboratory where you have a laboratory, people come and use the facility. It's funded by manufacturers and nonprofits, and the manufacturers get the output of that research, and new businesses then can come in too, and the funders are involved in the whole process. So a future with etheric energy, I think, can be pushed forward a little bit if we can come up with a process that can do this, and help us to access radiant energy of the vacuum. I think has now been demonstrated. Practical devices are beginning to emerge. Progress in vacuum energy devices will be enhanced if we can get some more funding, and we can have private funding of the research, encourage that, and get coordination of research efforts through maybe this incubator process, more public forums, public education, and one of the areas we need to work on is our youth. They get programmed the other direction so early, and then we've lost them. So that's an area we need to work on. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
All right here. Questions, anybody?
Yeah, keep your questions in just general, and I'll ask specific technical questions out there.
Testing. Yes, the fact that you mentioned to keep the motor running, you had to swap out the batteries when they dropped 1 or 2/10 of a volt. That makes it not apparent that you're actually extracting any energy from zero-point energy or from vacuum or from radiant energy.
I thought about that. What you'll notice is the primary battery will drop 2/10 of a volt, and then you swap it over. It immediately absorbs the energy from those other batteries on the other side, and it appears that you're not losing any energy in the batteries over time in that process. So the 6 batteries are gathering in the vacuum energy, and so when you swap the primary battery over there, it takes in that energy and charges back up to the level of the 6 batteries.
You always use the same batteries, exchanging them, right?
Yeah, the 6 batteries, you're just rotating them in a row.
How long would this keep running for? Indefinitely?
I have not been able to take it out for any more than 2 days, and so there's more work there to be done.
After a couple of days, were the batteries mostly depleted then?
No, the batteries will still be at the same voltage levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, did you quantify, you're saying it's an over-unity device, right? It's putting out more energy than it's
I'm sorry,
using.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, this is
Put it
what
up
you're
closer
saying.
here.
What you're saying is this clearly is an over-unity device, that it puts out more energy than it's using to run itself. Did you quantify that? Do you have a figure, like so much going in and so much coming out? Did you quantify how much extra energy is coming out of this thing?
I just haven't put them on the slides here. Maybe we can talk outside.
Okay.
go through that with you.
Hi, this is Casey. I wanted to ask, do you know of any research that has shown how many times you can swap the battery before it loses voltage? Or does it lose voltage?
How many times what?
Have many times can you swap the batteries before
Oh.
they start losing voltage?
I
Or
just,
do they?
I just continually swap them.
I know,
So-
but have you seen research that's been done longer than you have been doing them that shows that truly is the way it is? Like, do they lose voltage over time? Have you seen any research that have been extensive in that regard?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Well, I mean, because you're swapping the batteries, but you said you've only done it for maybe 2 days, right?
Yeah.
So have you seen any research that has gone on longer than that? And
Yeah.
been able to verify if the batteries lose voltage or not?
You know, and there's a possibility that the voltages may drift down over time. But the other thing you need to keep in mind when you do the energy analysis of that, there's only one battery dropping 0.2 of a volt. You have 6 batteries, then pick up that 0.2 of a volt, and you're running a watt through that motor. So the energy balance is definitely in favor of the output versus the input.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My name is Joe Lewis. I'm interested in the over-unity of Bedini and Newman motors, and also been doing some extensive research with jewel thieves, and wondered, one of my goals is to incorporate a jewel thief technology in charging it with, in conjunction with a Bedini or Newman, and possibly getting that charging issue longevity corrected to a more serviceable lifetime. Does that make sense to you, or have you worked with jewel thieves any?
Certainly. You know, this is experimental research. It's basic research, trying to understand the fundamentals of how this technology works. And it's not really a practical device at this point in time, although you can probably take a tin pole and get some useful energy out of it. So we're in a transitory period here of getting a real practical off-the-shelf device. So there's a lot
Exactly.
of research and you know, work that you've got to do on your own to get your own device going at this point in time.
Right. I'm just drawing kind of several things together that it might be a good idea to incorporate several of these technologies to, you know, piggyback one on the other to achieve a better output.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, first of all is you can increase the leverage on this by putting more coils, putting more rotors. That's one approach.
Right.
The other is you could use the input could be from solar energy, it could be from wind energy, and so you use that kind of technology to make that work, and then you could use the output to run other devices. So,
Supercapacitors.
thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. A hand for James Schmidt, and we'll be starting around 1.
Thank you.